A new era of global trade is upon us. 2023 marked the inauguration of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, a watershed moment in global commerce that could change the global economy forever. This new venture aims to bring not just strengthened trade ties between India, the Middle East, and Europe, but also means the beginning of new trade pathways and connections between non-Western nations. Instead of following the traditionally Western-centric routes, IMEC plans to cut its own path and streamline the exchange of goods, services, and capital between Southeastern Asia, the Middle East, and finally, Europe, a move that could potentially transform the economic landscape for good. But why is IMEC such a big deal? In the global economy, there's no country rising quite as strong and as fast as India, quickly becoming an economic superpower of its own right, with its GDP soaring beyond $3 trillion to surpass the UK as the fifth largest economy in the world. India's economic rise has been nothing short of incredible, and it's the core of the IMEC corridor. India's strategic location and economic influence make it the crucial link. However, IMEC represents more than just trade. It also aims to be a cultural and technological bridge between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Yet, while the announcements have been made and the agreement signed, there's still plenty of challenges to making the IMEC a reality. Most important of all is the issue of conflict and stability in the very areas the trade route is supposed to pass through. The corridor, threading through the Middle East on its way to Europe and abroad, faces real vulnerabilities to regional conflicts, most especially being the recent outbreak of conflict between Israel and Hamas. Such conflicts now bring to light the project's delicate nature, and mean that even now, it's no sure thing to be successful. Still, if IMEC can avoid the potential pitfalls and challenges, it could transcend the role of a mere trade route. Instead, it could very well be a brand new strategic initiative in the realm of global politics, one large enough and important enough to even challenge China's Belt and Road. Backed by the US and EU, with President Biden even calling it a game-changing investment, IMEC will be a testing ground for how emerging economic powers, like India, can improve their position in the global economic order. But how did the IMEC come to be, and how will it change international trade? On September 10, 2023, at the G20 summit being held in New Delhi, India, a Memorandum of Understanding was signed, and the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor was officially announced. The ambitious project brought together the governments of India, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, Italy, and even the European Union. The goal? To establish a key economic corridor through rail and shipping lines, connecting India with the Middle East and Europe. The corridor is designed for both the flow of trade and for improving India's connectivity to the Gulf and Europe. As of now, the plan involves constructing new railway lines across the Arabian Peninsula, from the UAE, across Saudi Arabia and Jordan, all the way to Israel and the Mediterranean, with shipping lines making up the rest of the journey. There will be two main sections: the Eastern Corridor, which links India with the Middle East, and the Northern Corridor, connecting the Middle East with Europe. The end result? A continuous network that will boost trade and economic integration. And in today's global economy, that's an incredibly valuable proposition. India's economic rise makes it one of the economic giants of our time. With a GDP that crossed $3 trillion in 2021, India is the key player in the IMEC, which can connect the nation's robust economy with those of the Middle East and Europe. With total imports of $373 billion and exports of $285 billion, India's trade relationships over the next few decades will be more important than ever. A trade route that can link foreign demand with India's domestic supply and vice versa is a revolution in global trade. This is also important for India if it's going to become a stronger economic power in its own region, the Indian Ocean. As it stands, India is a top 5 import partner for most nations of the region, like Iran, neighboring Myanmar, the Gulf states, and much of Africa's east coast. However, it's China that has outperformed everybody in the region for the last few decades. China has the highest trade volume with countries in the region, to the tune of $900 billion, followed by the United States, then Japan, and then finally India. So, the corridor is set to revolutionize trade routes from India to Europe. But in practice, what would it look like? The plan proposes a combination of rail and sea links, including a clean hydrogen pipeline, electricity cables, and even high-bandwidth digital cables. Planners also hope to build off the existing sea and road networks to connect India with the Gulf states. Central to this network is the railway infrastructure though, which will serve as a bridge between Asia and Europe, shuttling goods across the peninsula, up to the Mediterranean. But the exact layout and trajectory isn't a done deal just yet, and plenty of infrastructure is still unfinished. There already exists a railway network from the Emirates to the Saudi border, but additional rail tracks would need to be laid to connect it to Hada in Saudi Arabia, then from Hada to Rida and on to the Jordanian border town of Al Qurayat. The kingdom's 2,750-kilometer-long north-south railway would bring the freight to the Mediterranean once new tracks are built from Al Qurayat to Beit Shean in Israel. The specific ports to be used are also up in the air, with multiple in consideration, both in India, in the Gulf, and in Europe. But the IMEC corridor isn't just about infrastructure. Sure, building new railways and ports to transport goods is incredibly important, but it's the movement of these goods that represent a potential economic revolution. The IMEC is projected to cut transportation costs by up to 40%, according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. With the involved nations' combined GDP standing at about $47 trillion, nearly half of the world's total, IMEC spans a customer market of just about 2.25 billion people. It's hard to underestimate the value of such a market. Another effect of the trade corridor would be to streamline international trade. IMEC is a direct and efficient route. It connects Mumbai to Dubai by sea, and then Dubai to Haifa by rail, passing through strategic Middle East locations. From Haifa, the journey continues by sea to Piraeus, Greece, where trade is opened up with the rest of Europe, and its own extensive network of rails and ports. And it's a significant alternative to the traditional Suez Canal route. While the rail segment introduces some higher costs, the increase in speed may be worth it, since it allows for handling increased trade volumes and easing the burden on the Suez Canal. Despite so many new opportunities, some challenges still remain. The IMEC corridor faces a lot of uncertainty, particularly with delays in strategic meetings and finances still unclear. The infrastructure to make IMEC a reality demands a lot of investment, potentially up to $8 billion, and there's still work to be done on that front. There's also geopolitical challenges. Europe and the US are particularly concerned that the corridor's resources might help increase Russian and Chinese influence indirectly. Altogether, this makes the IMEC a great opportunity, but an uncertain one to say the least. Aside from its obvious economic benefits, the IMEC corridor is also going to be a massive geopolitical opportunity. So much so, the Saudi Arabian investment minister linked it to the historic Silk Route and Spice Road. Years ago, such a project would have been unthinkable, but recent diplomacy between Saudi Arabia and Israel has begun to make it possible, along with the rise of India and Western competition with China. The corridor faces competition though. Iraq's Development Road Project, a $17 billion investment linking the Persian Gulf to Turkey, could emerge as competition to IMEC, and there's others. The International North-South Transport Corridor is Russia's counter-move to IMEC, the INSTC. The transport corridor is meant to provide Moscow with a trade lifeline amidst Western sanctions. In response to its actions in Ukraine, the US and Europe effectively cut Russia's access to European markets. But the INSTC, which stretches a full 7,200 kilometers to connect Russia with India through Iran, has shifted from idea to reality. Analysts predict the INSTC could transport substantial freight by 2030, a thought that policymakers in the West, especially in the US, don't like one bit. If implemented, the INSTC would basically revolutionize Eurasian trade, providing a faster and cost-effective alternative to traditional sea routes. Already, some pilot transits have taken place, going from Russia to India via Iran's Bandar Abbas port. Like IMEC, this corridor significantly shortens travel time and reduces costs. It crosses Central Asia, the Caspian Sea, Iran, and the Arabian Sea, cutting transit from 40 to 60 days to just 25 to 30 days, and cutting costs by up to 30%. For India, it's more than logistics. It's a strategic path to Central Asia and Afghanistan, and one that bypasses Pakistan. However, it's a route that the US and its allies aren't so fond of, and so its support of IMEC makes sense. In the West, the IMEC corridor is largely seen as bringing Saudi Arabia and the UAE closer to the West and away from China. But the reality is more complicated. Instead, it's more like Ryder and Abu Dhabi are diversifying their geopolitical alliances. The Gulf states are focused on maintaining ties with major powers like the US, China, India, and Europe, without overly committing to any. This is a position that Saudi Arabia, especially Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, like to be in, where they can balance their relations with leaders like Biden, Xi, Modi, and Putin, in a way where the Gulf states remain a focal point of international competition and cooperation. And this gets to the heart of the geopolitical reality of the IMEC. The India-Middle East-Europe corridor is emerging as India's and the West's strategic counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Several Middle Eastern nations are already BRI members, and the US has raised concerns over China's growing presence in the region, especially in critical locations like Israel's Haifa port. IMEC offers an alternative. It strengthens ties between countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states. And for India, IMEC is crucial for energy security and protecting its large expat workforce across the region. Now, you may be asking yourself though, what exactly is China's Belt and Road? While the topic would span an entire other video, to put it simply, the Belt and Road Initiative is China's global development strategy to improve infrastructure and investment in over 150 countries. Beginning in 2013, it's been a key part of Chinese foreign policy under Xi Jinping, aimed at increasing China's global leadership and influence. It includes investment in important infrastructure, like ports, railroads, and roads all across Asia, Africa, and Europe, particularly in developing countries. But can the IMEC really rival China's Belt and Road? While the new trade corridor is definitely a significant development in global infrastructure, it's not quite on par with China's BRI. The BRI, with a decade's head start and over $1 trillion in investments, is a vast network that spans continents and over 150 countries. And so, although the IMEC may represent the West's response to China's influence, it certainly does not match the BRI's scale or ambition. However, it does mark a shift in the global economy, and an important one. Clearly though, the US is hoping that the India-Middle East-Europe corridor can at least act as a counter to China's growing economic influence in that part of the world. The strategic benefit of the IMEC lies less in competing with the Belt and Road and more in leveraging India's growing economic power. The corridor connects one of the fastest growing economies in the world to the West, and does so without the influence of the US's key rivals of Russia, Iran, and the growing threat of China. All in all, it reflects a broader strategic shift, one that recognizes India's significance in the global economy. All that being said, there are some clear challenges ahead for the future of the IMEC. The absence of key nations like the UK and Turkey already poses some challenges. Post-Brexit, the UK is notably MIA from the agreement, but efforts to get it involved would definitely bolster the economic value of the corridor. Similarly, Turkey's been left out too, and Turkish President Erdogan has slammed the coalition for it, asserting that the corridor simply can't work without Turkey's inclusion. Stability concerns are also mounting. As soon as the IMEC had been signed into agreement, conflict had broken out in the very region at the heart of the corridor. With the renewed conflict between Israel and Hamas, doubts are already being cast on the IMEC. Stability and security concerns are critical for economic corridors like IMEC because of their multinational nature. Stable political and security environments ensure the safe and efficient movement of goods and services, but regional conflicts disrupt these networks, jeopardizing the entirety of the corridor itself. So, is it really true that, as some pundits and politicians are claiming, the IMEC is basically dead on arrival? Whether it's Turkey playing the critic because of their exclusion, the Gulf states refusing to take stronger stances against the economic might of China, or the altogether security crisis the region has been plunged into, the IMEC corridor may really be too little too late for the West's new vision of regional trade. At the end of the day, it really all depends on the Israel-Hamas conflict. On October 7, 2023, the Israeli-Palestine conflict reignited in a major way, marking the most recent military escalation in decades. This followed escalating tensions in September, when Israel halted exports from Gaza after discovering explosives, and Hamas heightened military readiness. An attack by Hamas forces struck deep into Israeli territory, and conflict has been reigned since. Despite mediation efforts, the situation has only worsened, leading to aerial bombardments and a ground invasion of Gaza by Israeli forces. Launched at dawn on a Saturday, Hamas's surprise attack dealt a heavy blow to Israeli military outposts and civilians, resulting in hundreds of casualties. The offensive involved multiple incursions along the Gaza-Israel border, leading to Israeli civilians and military personnel being kidnapped by Hamas fighters. Israeli forces were largely caught off guard. In response, Israeli authorities urged evacuations in several towns and warned of retaliatory actions against Gaza. In the following days and weeks, Israeli forces shelled large parts of the Gaza Strip before eventually beginning its ground invasion in recent weeks. Besides the obvious awful effects of the conflict, it also represents a massive setback for the IMEC. While the route is set to span all the way from India to Europe, the Middle East is the key link, especially the passage through Jordan and Israel. IMEC's progress was already complex, but now plenty is in doubt. In particular, the normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia that were crucial to making the IMEC happen are now on hold. Although Israel's economic relations with the UAE remain stable, any links involving Jordan and Israel may face tough opposition, particularly after Israel's actions in Gaza. Without speculation, it's clear that the main benefactors of the recent conflict, termed the Al-Aqsa flood operation, are China and Russia. China, along with its Russian ally, would likely have already realized how dangerous the establishment of this Indian corridor was to their international interests, especially economic ones, and the interests of their Egyptian ally in the Suez Canal. The IMEC corridor and its potential as a counter to China's Belt and Road threatens to reshape global trade in favor of the Western Europe by creating instability in Israel. The operation indirectly benefits these nations by casting doubt on the feasibility of IMEC and maintaining the status quo of existing trade routes like the BRI and the Suez Canal. So, it's time to answer the question, for all its potential, is the IMEC really just dead on arrival? As much as some pundits want to say so, there is still too much uncertainty to be sure. Skeptics will point to past failures of similar Western infrastructure initiatives, the logistical complexities of the corridor, and significant uncertainty around investment. Then, of course, there's the Israel-Hamas conflict, which potentially disrupts the diplomatic normalization crucial for the corridor's success. Where does that leave the future of the IMEC? As imagined, the India-Middle East-Europe corridor offers tons of potential for transforming not just regional trade, but global trade as well. The agreement between India, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the EU, and others could streamline connectivity from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, reducing transport times and cutting costs. The IMEC's development could lead to increased economic growth, job creation, and enhanced trade, especially with India, now the fifth largest economy in the world. All in all, it's a forward-looking initiative in global trade that could reshape the economy for decades to come. If it's successful, that is, the future of the IMEC is shadowed by plenty of challenges, complex logistics, substantial investment needs, and diplomatic normalization are critical hurdles. Then, of course, the recent Israel-Hamas conflict could bring down the entire corridor all on its own. The geopolitical dynamics at play, along with regional instabilities and issues, all add layers of complexity. Altogether, these factors and many more make it unclear whether the IMEC can really be the new Silk Road it's dreamed up to be. We'll just have to wait and find out. So, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you get notified when the next video comes out. Thanks for watching.